Hi there and welcome back to the next video on rowing technique with Robin Williams. Last time I talked about the finish of the stroke and the fact that we want to accelerate pretty hard, pretty fast towards the finish, but what happens when we get there, when we have to turn that mass, that acceleration around into the recovery again. And we did some feet out work to explain, to both illustrate the problem and also help with the solution. So moving on from that, today I'm going to cover that area again a little bit, but from the point of view of the power sequencing from the front to the back of the stroke. Because in rowing, obviously we're rowing an arc of 90 degrees for sweep, maybe 110, 115 in sculling, and it's important that we apply the effort, the power, the work at the right speed and the right amount, angle for angle as we come through that arc. If we put too little power on at the front, then we don't get a good enough connection. If we put too much on, then we can block the stroke. So again, there are things we want to do, there are problems that arise, and also I'm going to look at some potential solutions and some drills which you can try. Okay, let's have a look. Okay, so let's have a think about the power chain in rowing, also known as the kinetic chain or the muscle chain. And last time, as we mentioned, the legs, trunk and arms sequencing, those three segments are really important. I think the easiest place to go about this actually is to start at the finish, and I'll explain, and look at this in reverse. In the finish position here, you can see that I've got legs fully extended, my body angle is inclined backwards, shoulders and elbows are drawn through. So if I think to myself as a rower, like, how do I end up in this position without falling into some of the pitfalls and problems that I mentioned in the last video of collapsing or losing contact with the footboard? I end up here because finally my elbow has pulled the handle through to this point. From elbow to hand, I can't shorten that distance, but I can, if I move my elbow, the handle will move. So this is really the last important joint in this kinetic chain. But how does the elbow end up there? The elbow ends up there because the shoulder has pulled it through. The shoulder actually has a lot of muscle around it, and although the retraction movement is a fairly short range, it's actually very strong. And in this last portion of the stroke, it's a really important way of connecting and keeping the connection going between footboard and handle, and stopping the finish feeling heavy. How does my shoulder end up here? Because my trunk has swung through. So I'm working this through in reverse to explain that this is the weakest, last point in the chain, second weakest, next strongest, strongest. So we're doing it in reverse order. Okay, so the trunk pulls the shoulder pulls the elbow pulls the handle, and the handle finishes up here. Where does the trunk get its power from? It gets it from the hip, from the quads, glutes, back extensors, and as soon as you've got some knees to play with, some leg travel, it adds a lot of power. So that knee push and hip push creates the impulse for the trunk, for the shoulder, for the elbow, for the handle. As you can see, there's a logical sequence developing here. And from the front, before the knees can start getting into real drive mode, we've got to get a little bit of angle open here, because we need to row a long stroke in rowing and in sculling, but actually, mechanically speaking, it's not that strong a position. The mid-stroke is much, much stronger, but we need the length. So we accept that we're going to row in a compressed leg position here. But my quads and my knee at this point can't generate very much horizontal force. Really, any effort here, or too much effort, would be trying to drive my knee down through my ankle. It's kind of like standing up. That's what happens. So the first bit of the stroke, having talked about the back end of it, the first bit at the front is from the foot, the ankle, and the shin. And it's a squeezing movement there. I think everybody would understand that idea. We've got to connect everything up, take out the slippage and the slack in the system, squeeze it, and begin to get a bit of angle here. And once the knee is behind the ankle, there, then we can start to get some useful push, and you can hear the extra noise that we can generate on the machine. So the sequence is, if you like, from the very beginning, toes or balls of the feet, ankle, knee, hip, chest, shoulder, elbow, and we finish up here. Simple enough in theory. The problem with rowing is, of course, and it's much more difficult in the boat than it is on a rowing ergometer, and a fixed ergometer is easier than a dynamic one. The problem in the boat is that the boat moves around. We've got other people possibly in the crew. We have to stay in time, and there are all kinds of things that can interfere with this muscle chain. So if we think about some typical problems now, and then also some solutions. On the way forwards, people very often tip or overreach, slump, and the deeper you go here, the more you tend to lose posture. I'm not great with posture these days, but off the back end here I can think about sitting quite well, quite tall, keep things tucked in here. The deeper I go here, the more I tend to round underneath here. That will lift my heels higher. That makes a difference to how I start my chain of movement. Other problems would be overreaching out through the upper back and shoulders. And typically when people actually start the work, if they've mistimed the entry, they'll grab it on the arms. So you see people starting the stroke in this kind of position with a loss of length in the arm. And a good sort of motto or adage, I think, is that you can only make a movement once in the rowing stroke. You can only make each movement once. So for instance here, if I lose my seat, make a bum shove, I've lost that angle. I can't get it back. If I open my body, I can't get it back. It's gone. If I break my arms, throw my head back, any movement, I can only make a movement once because it's a continuing cycle. So as far as possible, I want to start this chain of movement in the right way. That's down here. This is the moving part in the whole assembly is down here. The arms are staying long. The body is staying forwards. In fact, really, it gets into its catch position here, and we're still in the catch position as we push out of the front. And then around about here, something like 3/4 slide, the handle's roughly over the stretcher in my case, I've got contact in the heels. When I've got contact in the heels, I can employ the glutes and the core, and in fact all of my mass, much more aggressively. When I'm on my toes, it is more of a squeeze. When I get heel contact here, it becomes much more of a drive and the proper acceleration movement. So if we start the stroke well, hopefully we can finish it well. So it's through the toes and the ankle and the shin and the knees and the hip and the chest and shoulders and finally the elbows. Simple enough in theory, not so easy to do perfectly in the real world, I know. Okay, what about some solutions? Well, good drills that you can do, and you can do this on the ergo and in the boat. It's an exercise I call 3 halves, and I know you can't have 3 halves, literally speaking, but there's an overlap between the 3 parts, so you'll see what I mean. So I'm just going to put my feet in for this part. So the first half is the first half of the stroke. So we row from here to about here, a little bit in front of the knees. The legs aren't flat, so this part of the stroke. We've got the leg push with just the beginning of a body movement. There. And we practice getting a nice flow, fluid hands on the machine. And we're just practicing pushing, not pulling. Pushing the machine, or pushing the boat. Okay, that's the first half. Then we've got the second half of the stroke, which is I'd call quarter slide or third slide here, where it's all about opening up angles, being explosive, taking a lot of speed into the handle, really driving the acceleration. There. Much more about upper body with just what's left of the legs. Then the third part is of course the middle bit. Now the middle bit I take to keep the heels down. I'd call it about 3/4 slide. We go 3/4 slide to just the break of the arms. So it's just the middle bit of the stroke. And I don't have the benefit of a mirror or a coach to check whether I'm doing that right, but in principle we're taking the stroke divided into 3 bits with overlap. The first bit is all about pushing, not about pulling. The middle bit is about getting this angle and this angle really powering up, and the final bit obviously is trying to hang on to the stroke and finish it in the way we looked at in the first video. Now just to finish with, one final thought is this, that if you get this sequence wrong, it does have consequences, quite severe ones. So for instance, if I'm pushing my legs here, I should be pushing my legs here, but actually I open my body instead, the effect of using my trunk too soon slows down the progress of this knee joint, which means I've got a heavy, slow leg drive. Instead of a leg drive which is developing, it gets blocked by my body movement. And in the same way, when I want my trunk to be moving and really beginning to accelerate off my hips, if I break my arms too early, so if I should be doing this, but actually I do this, my arm pull, a premature pull, interrupts the progress of my body movement. So it's pretty important that the legs are given the opportunity to build up their acceleration and their power before the body comes in, and the body likewise builds up its power before the arm draw comes in. If we do it right, then you get a nice sort of crescendo conclusion to the stroke, a nice sort of slingshot finish, catapult, whatever you want to call it. If we do it wrong and we grab at the front and lift our body, you just get a very sort of turgid, heavy looking stroke that doesn't have great acceleration, and therefore you're never going to get much rhythm out of that. Okay, so there we are, a few thoughts on the power chain. I hope that's been of some help. I look forward to seeing you next time.